Hello and welcome to the One Life Church devotional series where we cover the entire Bible in 20 months. Well, today's chapters are Isaiah 20 and Jude. Jude, a short little letter written by one of the half-brothers of Jesus. Now, Jesus had four brothers. None of them followed him while he was alive, but once they had seen him risen from the dead, they all became disciples. In fact, they became leaders in the early church. Now, this brother, Jude, demonstrates a thorough knowledge of the scripture and in fact of Hebrew literature, because he quotes not only the Old Testament, but he quotes some Hebrew texts written by Moses and written by Enoch that are actually not in the Bible. Quite amazing. So he says, Jude, a servant of Jesus Christ and a brother of James, just so that you know which Jude it is. This word Jude is more accurately translated Judah in the Hebrew context. He would have been Judah. He says, I was eager to write to you about the salvation we share. But then in verse 3, he says, but I felt compelled to write to you to contend for the faith that was once and all entrusted to God's holy people. Now, I've seen this illustration used before, and it's been very helpful to me. There are some issues that you contend for. We call them closed-fisted issues. You grab onto those things, you hold on to them forever. The deity of Christ, the inerrancy of Scripture, a literal heaven, a literal hell, the return of Jesus, the Trinity. You fight for those things. These are what our forefathers died for. And then there are other things which we call open-handed issues. It doesn't really matter what you believe about that. They're not salvation issues. They're not issues we contend for. Issues like, do cats go to heaven? I mean, who really cares? What do you anoint? Do you anoint on the forehead? Do you anoint on the shoulder? Do you anoint buildings? What do you anoint? These things are not things that we die for. But he says, I felt compelled to write to you about the things that we contend for. He says, now, there's certain people that have come in amongst your midst who pervert grace. Grace is an issue we contend for. He also makes mention of eternal fire, judgment, a reckoning with God is something we contend for. He says, listen, these people that don't contend for these things, they slander celestial beings. In other words, they shout and scream at the devil. He says, little do they know, the very thing that they don't understand is going to come upon them. You don't behave like that, is what he says. And then he gives examples of other people in the Bible that you ought not to follow. And so he gives examples of Sodom and Gomorrah and Cain, etc., who lived immoral lives. And he says, just look at the lives of these people that are not contending for the faith. You don't want to follow people like that. Their followers do what they do. And then he uses examples from Enoch and Moses that are from Jewish literature, not even the Bible. And he says that like those guys, these chaps are blemishes around the Lord's table. And then he quotes Ezekiel, says they're like shepherds who are feeding themselves. Then he quotes Proverbs, saying they're like a cloud with nothing in it. Then he quotes Isaiah, saying they're like a wave just tossed on the sea, going nowhere. These people are grumblers and fault finders. He says, have nothing to do with them. In the last days, you're going to see plenty of them. Be alert. Don't follow people who are not contending for the faith. They divide you. He says, instead, snatch people from the fire. By what? Preaching the gospel, holding on to the things that are important. Now, Isaiah 20 is dated specifically in the year that the supreme commander sent by Sargon, king of Assyria, came to Ashdod, attacked and captured it. Well, secular history books tells us that event happened in BC 711. And so we know exactly when it happened. And Isaiah was told by God, when that happened, take off your outer garments, go around stripped and barefoot, it says in verse 2. Now, we shouldn't assume that now Isaiah is running around stark naked. It's like he's wandering around in his pajamas, like he's running around in his underwear. He's taken off his outer garment. And many other prophets were asked to do strange things. Hosea was asked to marry a dodgy woman. Ezekiel lay on his side for a long time. He's demonstrating something. He's saying, look, Assyria is going to be stripped bare. And you might say, well, what's the point of this? Well, it's like God had pushed Israel into a corner. In the previous chapter, now this one showing these two massive superpowers, Assyria and Egypt, they can't be trusted. Can't go into alliance with him. You got to trust God. Throw yourself on him. The deliverance will come through him. That's what he's saying to the Israelites in this particular chapter.